We are all familiar with the 50s housewife advertisements that seem so amusing today. There's even a popular line of spoof products where you can buy humorous wall calendars, magnets, coasters, and greeting cards poking fun at those times. Those funny greeting cards help us laugh at the past and be grateful that things are so much better today. And while we can be grateful that ads like these are no longer acceptable, the overt sexism and advertising of yesteryear is still all around us. While countertop kitchen appliance makers might not be demeaning women to make their products seem so versatile, and cigarette makers may not be showing men disrespecting women by blowing smoke in their faces to make the men seem more commanding, there are still degrading and dehumanizing messages in our culture. It's simply changed form. The current media environment is more toxic than ever, often using highly sexualized imagery of women to sell their products without concern for the collective harm it does on the public. Back in the 70s, it was reported that the average person saw between 500 and 1,600 ads a day between commercials, product placements, billboards, and print ads. Today, the estimate is between 6,000 and 10,000 advertisements per person per day. How can that be? Much of it can be attributed to online advertising, where ads are placed at the top of search engine results, in-app banner ads to use to pay for free apps, video ads on sites like YouTube or Vimeo, social media ads, ads within bills like credit cards, influencers, in-game ads, and the original banner ad. A lot of old school advertising techniques are still enforced too, however. Techniques like product placement in TV shows or including toys in packaged foods like cereal or in fast food meals have only increased. The advertising industry targets children to establish brand loyalty and indoctrinate them into the beliefs that help sell their products and services, and in so doing, keep the public in a compromised state of mind that keeps them more vulnerable to manipulation. By far, the most effective strategy for selling products is using women. Sexist attitudes plus advertising strategy equals increased market share. Why? By exploiting the fault lines in culture, advertisers can fan the flames of insecurity, inventing needs to fulfill, creating new markets. But what do girls and women have to feel insecure about? The late art critic and essayist John Berger wrote in his essay, Ways of Seeing, the ideal spectator is always assumed to be male and the image of women designed to flatter him. He also observed, men look at women, women watch themselves being looked at. Of course, this is true not just in art, but in movies, music videos, advertising, clickbait, and all forms of media. What effects does this have on girls and women? When our visual culture represents us this way, how do we perceive ourselves? How do we show up in our own lives? Artist Roy Lichtenstein parodied the dichotomy of gender in his paintings of men and women. At the time, critics considered his work trash and not fine art because it was derived from the supposed unenlightened commercial world of kid lit. But he soon attracted a following because he brought into focus a truth about our culture. That the way culture was portrayed through what was considered inferior pulp fiction was a distillation of the way women and men are portrayed in media. And this distillation acted as a positive feedback loop, reinforcing gender norms. Girls and women get the message that what they are valued for is their looks. And boys get the message that men are valued for what they do, that it is their actions that matter. In a New York Times piece discussing the issues of male professors sleeping with their female students, philosopher Amia Srinivasan talked about how female students tend to interpret the feelings aroused in them by their male professors as a desire for the professor. Male students, however, tend to interpret their feelings toward their male professors as they are socialized to do, as a desire to be like them. What makes young women misunderstand the intellectual stimulation they feel as feelings of attraction, while the young men in the room simply see a role model to emulate? Serenity Bowson talks about how this shows up in the classroom as an implicit understanding, often internalized, of what girls and boys, women and men are for. That line really stood out to me, that media is teaching us what our purpose is, and that even in environments that are supposed to be totally equal and for the enrichment and empowerment of all present, that the result of how we've been raised in the world means that we find ourselves in dynamics that put us in certain lanes of success or inertia. Not only does this set girls and women up for power imbalances that affect their learning and earning potential, this also sets up girls and women for all kinds of risk factors such as depression, eating disorders, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, and exploitation. Let's look at why. Research on early adolescence shows media exposure socializes girls in the following ways. Stereotypes of men and women's roles. The reinforcement of stereotypes of men and women's roles in society have the effect of keeping women in their place. Philosopher Kate Mann explains this as like the invisible fence pet containment systems that many use in their yards. Just like the invisible fence, women cannot see the line they are not supposed to cross, but they know it is there. And so, like the dog wearing the shock collar, they keep inside the boundaries, knowing if they go beyond, there will be a consequence. Adolescent girls sense this and begin conforming to society's expectations to avoid condemnation. Sexist beliefs. Media has many narratives that show women being objectified, at times being glorified for this, and at other times being pilloried. This sends a message that the value is up to the men in their lives, despite being contradictory and capricious. Rather than questioning the logic of being idolized and then trashed later, girls often internalize the shame they receive, or in turn, shame their female peers. Conceptions of romance. When boys see rom-coms, they take note that romance is a strategy to get sex. When girls see rom-coms, their expectations of romance diminish because they take away the message that men do not really believe in it or are not likely to do it. This sets up boys who expect sex when they do modest and cliched forms of romance. And when girls receive these expressions, it mimics the movies and make them more hopeful and grateful, setting up for a transactional, intimate encounter. Appearance socialization. While adolescent boys are also concerned with their appearance, they have plenty of male role models whose appearance is not sexualized, are not particularly aesthetically handsome, and yet are respected and valued by others. Girls, however, have the opposite. They have few female role models in positions of respect and power. What they do have are an inundation of images of sexualized women, giving them constant reminders of what society values. Often these images of attractive women are critiqued, sending the message that there is no woman beyond criticism. With more exposure to media, especially forms that sexualize girls and women's bodies, girls are more likely to self-objectify, to see their value wrapped up in their external experience at the expense of their inner worth. To an adolescent girl being surrounded by these images, what she sees is a type of power being presented, that if she wants to have power agency, she needs to do it within the language of being sexy. This is a false sense of power, as it is predicated on the approval of others. One place they see this expression of false power is in music videos where the woman objectifies herself and sexualizes her power. Adolescents' exposure to music videos was associated with higher levels of body surveillance, and this in turn was related to the girls' lowered body esteem, increased anxiety, and lowered confidence and math ability. Self-objectification is associated with other negative outcomes as well, including diminished academic performance, body shame, and depressive symptoms. Let's take a break from looking at these hypersexualized images of women and now turn to fine art for understanding. In the 70s, photographer Cindy Sherman did work exploring self-objectification. These are from her 1977 film still series. The series is of photographs of her imitating the B-movie roles women were relegated to. The effect on us is recognition. We're so used to seeing women depicted this way that we cease to question if this is realistic. Instead, the familiarity lulls us into acceptance. That one on the right, I love to show this one to my students and pick it apart. She is at the sink with a small apron to protect her outfit while she washes the dishes. She looks back over her shoulder in a seductive way. Why? We can tell her man has entered the room, and she immediately responds by putting on a sex kitten persona. Really? She is washing the dishes. Look at the environment around her. Hardly sexy, elegant, or romantic. But the message is that no matter what a woman is doing, no matter her inner world, she needs to be at the ready to respond to her man in the way he expects. On the one hand, it is really easy to write these messages off as silly and contrived and so easily discounted. That old adage asking if art imitates life or if life imitates art is relevant here. This photo depicts the comical when you think about whether women really act that way. I love to ask my students if they have ever seen Ms. Gallant, the high school librarian, take a book off the shelf that way. But actually, my grandmother was quite a bit like this. She was one of the first Eastman Kodak models, and boy, was she a beauty. Since she was a little girl, she was prized for her beauty, so much so that she had a hard time relating to people except in a sexualized way, much to the horror and embarrassment of her children. Take note of the self-consciousness of Sherman's photos. Each of the women in her film still series is aware they're being observed. They pose as if they know a man is watching them, even if they are supposed to be alone. In 1975, film theorist Laura Mulvey wrote about something she called the male gaze in her essay Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema. The male gaze is a consequence of having most of culture's storytelling done by men. Typical examples of male gaze are the way the camera moves across a woman's body as if the viewers are all heterosexual men, or women dressed in revealing clothing while the narrative is driven by the fully clad men in the story. She writes, the impact of the male gaze has been internalized to a certain extent by both men and women, and we may not always even be aware of its presence or how it influences our choices and vision of ourselves and others. In the 18th century, utilitarian architect and social theorist Jeremy Bentham designed a prison he called a panopticon that would keep its prisoners in a perpetual state of self-consciousness, leading to obedience. The way it worked was the prison was in the shape of a ring, one prison cell deep, with a watchtower in the courtyard. The prison cells had windows on the inside of the ring and the outside, creating a shadow box effect. The tower was deliberately designed so that the prisoners could not see the prison guards watching them. They saw the tower, knew they most likely were being watched, but could not verify it, so they were in a continuous state of unease that kept them in line. Even if no guards were present, the prisoners would be none the wiser and would continue their self-conscious obedience. Bentham never got to build his panopticon in his day. His critics found it too chilling. But much later, prisons were built based on his concept. The prison we see here is in Cuba. But his biggest legacy was in creating a potent symbol to help us understand power. Philosopher Michel Foucault wrote about the surveillance state using Bentham's panopticon to illustrate his theory, coining the term panopticism. Using the guard tower to show the effect of power that is visible and yet unverifiable, Foucault's work helped us understand the nature of power dynamics. A simple example of panopticism is the experience of walking to a convenience store, seeing the closed-circuit TV cameras, and immediately becoming self-conscious. When one first walks in, they had no intention of doing anything untoward, but as soon as they see the cameras, they become aware of how things might look and might be especially careful that their hands are always plainly visible and behave in a way to convey that they are obviously not shoplifting. The camera might not be on, the camera angle might not show anything, it might be too grainy. Maybe no one is watching the camera or ever checks the tapes, but the effect is the same. The sight of the camera creates a kind of obedience in all who notice it. Again, the characters in Cindy Sherman's film still series all have that self-consciousness about them. Here, a woman looks out the window. We, the viewer, are not really interested in what she is seeing because the artifice is so plain. The point is not what she's observing, rather that she is being observed. Men look at women, women watch themselves being looked at. This constant state of girls and women is panoptic. From women's magazines, girls get the message that the way to be liked, the way to be seen, and the way to be admired and to gain power is to be sexy and beautiful and to be sexually skillful. But men's magazines communicate an entirely different message. Whereas women's magazines embrace the male gaze, helping women fulfill the many conflicting and damaging demands made of them, men's magazines have a more low-key approach to their readers. They approach them as if these men have nothing to prove. And of course, men have their own set of pressures. But our visual culture is not constantly telling them that their worth is tied up in how they look and how sexy they are or are not. And so as men's magazines are free to talk to their audience about the things that truly interest them and to use the men they profile as depictions of self-worth to mirror back to the readers. Notice how none of these talk about how to be a better partner to a woman. It is presumed that the men are just fine the way they are. Women's magazines, however, rarely send that message. Instead, they have a frenzied tone of self improvement that's entirely based on how they'll be perceived by men. The magazines are embodiments of men look at women, women watch themselves being looked at, fueling the panoptic experience of being female in our culture. Many have written about social media is how it is a form of panopticism, that what we willingly post is subjecting us to the watchtower. Teen girls are especially vulnerable. Thanks to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and texting, girls don't just consume media, they also produce it. They craft their own self images and publish them for others to critique, applaud, or degrade. While boys at this age often use smartphones to play games, girls use them to compare and rank themselves versus each other and their favorite artificially perfected role models. Sudden TikTok fame is catching teens off guard, leaving many girls unprepared for the attention they thought they wanted, according to parents, therapists, and teens, Julie Jarkin writes in the Wall Street Journal. The girls who posted sexually suggestive content got a barrage of attention from boys and men, and that in itself was harmful. As Facebook whistleblower Frances Hogan explained, Facebook's internal research says that the highest rates of problematic use peak at age 14, a time when their problem-solving skills are still under development. Teens are telling researchers, I can't control my usage, and I know it's impacting my health, my employment, or my school. I know this is making me feel bad and I can't stop. I feel I'll be ostracized if I leave. Girls in particular report living a kind of double life, one that submits to the male gaze to elicit likes on social media, and another that is just their regular selves, that goes to school, has friends and family, interests, etc. One teen said that she would never go to school dressed the way she does on TikTok. Though this is a pronounced example of living a double life, many of us are doing a version of this. Spend too much time on the app and you're not just living vicariously through what you see. Those posts become yardsticks against which we measure our lives. And the reality can't match up to the filtered perfection that scrolls by with a flick of a thumb. Everyone's vacation, kids, dog, hair, car, home, clothes, and restaurant meal is better than yours. An endless infomercial for a never ending good life well beyond your grasp. The pressure in media for women to look perfect, to invest their energy in the appearance of how their lives look and not in what makes them feel good, can cause women to live double lives too. This woman, Shannon Watts, regularly posted her life on social media. And to those who followed her, she had it all. Over social media, she regularly thanked her husband, Chris, for putting up with three impatient, demanding women in the house. They lived in a spacious 5-bedroom home in Colorado, and they seemed to be living the idyllic life with their two daughters and a son on the way. While Shannon continued posting about her happy lives, little did people know that they're having relationship problems, or they had been separated for 5 weeks, or that they were in serious debt and had filed for bankruptcy a few years before, or that Chris would have been having an affair. One day, she and her daughters disappeared, and Chris went on TV pleading for them to be returned home safe. Soon after, their bodies were found, and he was arrested for their murders. Everyone was shocked. Chris seemed like the perfect husband and father. People saw him in the background of Shannon's Facebook Live videos, pecking up after baking cookies or giving their daughters bear hugs. And Shannon always wrote about how grateful she was to have such a supportive and wonderful husband. What happened? Of course, we don't know, but it seems that the life Shannon was posting out to the world was a continuation of our visual media culture, the tendency to sell ourselves to others as if we are a product. It seems she and Chris were both projecting an image to the world that was not complete. People saw the spacious 5-bedroom house and the telegenic family, but not the debt or the tensions. People saw the doting husband, but not his mistress. People saw Shannon's happy post about how fortunate she was, but not the desperate text to her husband to talk to her. In the 1960s, Andy Warhol created work exploring the effect of celebrity culture on the public, how a woman like Marilyn Monroe could become a product that is sold over and over again, her image being repeated so much so that who she is gets distorted, her humanity so diminished that she's obliterated before fading away from the public's consciousness. Warhol famously predicted, in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. Why did Warhol make Monroe look so funny? She's a beautiful woman, and yet in any of his paintings of her, she looks so garish. And yet there is still something so oddly appealing about his painting series of her. On the left is Norma Jean Baker before she became Marilyn Monroe. The transformation from teen model to blonde bombshell is significant. Monroe was known for giving the masses what they wanted, creating in herself a kind of synthetic beauty. In many paintings of her, Warhol is mocking her transforming herself so much so to give the people what they want, while also mocking us, the masses that lap up these celebrities. We chew them up and we spit them out. None of my students blink an eye at Warhol's prediction of 15 minutes of fame. It is so self-evident by now, but they need help in seeing that this making yourself into a product is still fairly new for humanity, and that doing so has real harms. Monroe once confessed, "I'm generally miserable." So are many girls and women. On the outside, they often look happy. But what happens when a girl or woman is successful in achieving the supposed ideal? They either attract lecherous attention, which can lead to sexual assault, but even if it doesn't, the lascivious attention itself is psychologically harmful. Or they can still be criticized for not meeting someone's preferences. She's not my type. I like big blondes with big boobs. Or they can be judged and degraded for internalizing and manifesting the sexualization of women they are constantly bombarded with. For understanding and how this all came to be, let's learn about the father of modern day marketing. Edward Bernays, a theorist who coined the very polite sounding term public relations for the manipulation of public perception and desire. Among his many accomplishments, he is responsible for making thinness in women the feminine ideal, and for making smoking, a previously forbidden activity for women, fashionable and even liberating. Hired by the American Tobacco Company to overcome taboos that prevented women from smoking, Bernays first focused on making thinness fashionable. He had photographers, magazines, and newspapers promote the ideal of thinness in women. He also had medical journals publish pieces promoting cigarettes as a healthy alternative to sweets. When it was found that Lucky Strike's green and red box clashed with current ladies' fashions, he campaigned for the color green itself, organizing a green ball at the Waldorf Astoria, hosted by suffragists and Montessori school co-founder Narcissa Cox Vanderlip. Under the pretense that the ball was to raise funds for charity, celebrities and society women were supposed to attend wearing green dresses. Fashion designers and retailers were informed of green becoming all the rage, while intellectuals were enlisted to give scholarly talks on the cultural importance of green. By the time the ball was held, green was all the rage, and the photos of the event helped make Lucky Strikes by subliminal association in vogue. Bernays felt that what he did was distinctly different and so much more than what advertisers did. A fan of propaganda and a nephew of Sigmund Freud, Bernays used psychology to tap into the subconscious to manipulate the masses for his clients' commercial objectives. As he once said, "If we understand the mechanism of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it." Bernays was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life magazine. By making thinness in women the ideal, a particularly hard objective for the female body with monthly hormonal shifts, childbearing, and an overall higher percentage body fat than men, Bernays gave women an elusive goal that undermined their confidence in themselves. The more they strove to be like the feminine ideal, the less they valued themselves for who they actually are and suffered psychological consequences. The more their psychological and emotional health was undermined, the more vulnerable they became to advertising. The trend was most striking among women aged 18 through 21. The number of women in this group who began smoking tripled between 1911 and 1925 and had more than tripled again by 1939. Because there was still a taboo of women smoking in public, Bernays linked smoking with women's freedom and liberation. He hired a group of attractive and fashionable young women to march to the New York City Easter Day parade. He asked them to tell the press that a group of women's rights marchers would light torches of freedom. A subsequent headline in the New York Times read, "Group of girls puff-sized cigarettes as a gesture of freedom." The story was picked up by other newspapers, and for weeks after, the spectacle created controversy, which kept the story going, eventually forever linking women's liberation and nonconformity with smoking, thereby making women's public smoking acceptable and fashionable. The linking of women's liberation and smoking has continued over the decades, and so has the linking of thinness with smoking. The industry has merely modernized their playbook. Techniques used to manipulate females into buying traditional cigarettes are still used today. Is there really much difference in how current companies like Juul manipulate teen girls into buying vaping products? Similar campaigns can be found in alcohol too, showing women as sophisticated, independent, and glamorous. Today, girls report that they drink to improve mood, increase confidence, reduce tension, cope with problems, lose inhibitions, and feel sexy or lose weight, according to the national survey results on drug use. And those reasons teenage girls cite are problems media created. Advertisements, movies, and shows all give girls and women reason to feel insecure, tense, inhibited, and feel pressure to be sexy and thin. And just like the beauty industry that targets girls when they are young, so does the alcohol industry by creating sweet soda-like drinks called alcopops and marketing them in a way to appeal to kids. Author educator Jean Kilborn explains why this age group is so vulnerable and attractive to advertisers. Adolescents are new and inexperienced consumers. They are in the process of learning their values and roles and developing their self concepts. Most teenagers are sensitive to peer pressure and find it difficult to resist or even to question the dominant cultural messages perpetuated and reinforced by media. As Media Smarts, as Media Smarts report put it, though they are allegedly intended to be consumed by adults, an American Medical Association study found that alcopops are most popular among 13-year-old girls, and that these kid-friendly candy-like cocktails make up 29% of this alcohol the group consumes. The same Media Smarts report analyzed alcohol ads and found they perpetuate stereotypes that objectified women while showing men in leisurely friendship with sexualized women fawning over them. Sexist attitudes plus advertising strategy equals increased market share. Again, by exploiting the fault lines in culture, advertisers fan the flames of insecurity, creating a society where women feel diminished. And in that compromised state, turn to products and substances in an attempt to feel whole and complete. So, what can we do? What can we do to lighten the oppression that girls and women face? How can we better provide a more healthy environment for them to thrive in, not just survive? Empathy and compassion. When we see a girl or a woman who's internalizing and expressing herself through the male gaze, let's not be judgmental. She's just trying to find a way to be in this world that's constantly passing judgment on the female body. There is no way to win in this game. You can check all the boxes and you'll still be judged. Even she, a heterosexual girl, manages to attract the boy she has an eye on. She will not win because he most likely will be attracted to her for her aesthetic appeal and not who she is as a person. There is also a sadness in being limited to just your physical appearance that can be confusing. On the one hand, you're being praised and celebrated, but on the other, you're being objectified, reduced to something for others' enjoyment. Teens have trouble reconciling the paradox. This painting by Picasso shows his model and mistress Marie-Therese Walter looking at herself before the mirror. In interpreting this work, many have commented on how we will do this for it to ourselves. We will look at ourselves in the mirror, and rather than see reality, we're harder on ourselves than is fair. But what forces are making us see ourselves that way? In Marie Therese's case, that was because she was 17 and Picasso was 45 when they began their affair. Picasso was known for as emotionally abusive to the people closest to him. And so when I see this painting, I don't pity or criticize Marie Therese for having such low self-esteem. Rather, I see it as an inevitable result of a power imbalance along with emotional abuse. Which brings us to the second thing we can do, recognize that this is a form of oppression. Objectifying yourself and feeling rotten as a result are two sides of the same coin. With all the world's problems, this might not seem like that big of a deal. That is just a burden that girls and women have to bear. But UNICEF has a campaign to reduce the hypersexualization of femininity in the media, stating, hypersexualized models of femininity in the media affect the mental, emotional, and physical health of girls and women on a global scale, and sexual objectification contributes to the harmful gender stereotypes that normalize violence against girls. Media literacy. Help your children see the messages behind the images. These magazine covers are parodies, but it is almost hard to tell. Women's magazines are not quite as overt as these spoofs. The information in them amounts to the same thing, however. Help your daughters see the motives behind the media, and for your sons for that matter. Helping the boys to see this messaging for what it is will give them a stronger ground to stand on for calling out problematic behavior when they see it in their male peers. Also initiate discussion around images that either explore or perpetuate these issues. Cindy Sherman's film still series is a great place to start because we know the woman in each of her film still series is Cindy Sherman herself. It helps the viewer see how we all at times mimic the visual culture around us. And it also shows that none of us are immune. This is the air we breathe. In this piece, we see a familiar trope we experience in movies. It looks like the woman was out with her man. Notice she is wearing a man's suit jacket over her shoulders. And there was some kind of disagreement where the man knocked the bag of groceries out of her hands and onto the floor. She stoops down to pick them up, maintaining eye contact. A lot of times movies will depict some sort of aggression men will make toward a woman, and she makes a show of being unperturbed by it, even maybe turned on by it. And this is what we're seeing here. She looks mad, yes, but also carefully considering the power dynamic she is in, and so poses in a way to highlight her sexiness, showing a little pout of indignation while conceding to pick up the spilled groceries. In scenes like these, you know what happens next. The man, inflamed a moment earlier by some petty slight, now forgets all and roughly takes her to bed. Scenes like this are common in movies and conflate anger, power, and arousal, a harmful narrative connection that confuses consent. When viewing problematic media content, whether it is advertising or entertainment, pause to discuss this with your child. The book 14 Conversations Before 14 gives a good format for doing this. Here are some good questions to pose to help your teen or preteen see subliminal messaging. What is the motive behind this ad or piece of media? Who gains and who loses when I believe my hair, lips, teeth, skin, body, or clothes aren't good enough? Who gets to tell me how a girl is supposed to act? What emotion does this media maker want me to feel so I'll buy or buy into what I'm seeing? How do corporations use every click I make on the internet to determine what ads, people, and stories I'll see next time?
Okay.
And I'll add one of my own, which is to point out that when a man is not a woman's aesthetic equal,
Little
that
anxiety.
is a polite way of saying a man is not as attractive as the woman he
Yeah,
seeks or the
I
woman
had
he
a
is
lot of
dating.
anxiety before I went to the hospital.
Why is this important? If we lived in a society where men and women are equally required to be attractive or equally encouraged to develop their inner selves instead, then this would be unnecessary. But to not comment on the very visible aesthetic imbalance we see between many heterosexual pairings perpetuates the double standard. When I mention that a man is not a woman's aesthetic equal to a teenage girl, she pauses for a moment to take in what I'm saying, and then immediately nods in pent up agreement. Because this is what she's experiencing all the time. Walking around in the mall, boys commenting on her appearance, but clearly not investing much time in their own appearance, yet still feeling entitled to state their opinion on any girl or woman who passes by. Pointing out the aesthetic imbalance validates teenage girls' experience and helps them divest from perpetuating the double standard. And if you have any younger children, you can try something I do. From an early age, I taught each of my sons to look away when a commercial is on, sometimes explaining ads aren't good for you. They try to make you feel bad so you'll buy things. My 5-year-old often jokes and tries to see them anyway, but I still do it because the point is not just to prevent him from seeing ads, it is to teach him that ads are not something you should trust. As a result of this, my now 11-year-old is highly suspicious of advertising and backs me up when my 5-year-old is skeptical of its harms. Practice media hygiene. Similar to what I do with my kids in teaching them to be leery of advertising, we should all be skeptical in our media environment and practice ways to be less enmeshed in it. Limit your family's exposure and have conversations where you actively question what you see. Some examples are screen-free Sundays, where everyone puts away their screens to do something non-digital. It's a great reminder that there are other ways to spend your time that you enjoy. My 11-year-old, who would prefer to be online playing Minecraft with his friends, spends his screen-free Sundays reading books and sketching. My 5-year-old is often complaining about screen-free Sundays, but he always has a blast playing with friends, sketching, building with blocks, and playing with Legos. A variation of this is Tech Shabbat. Like the Jewish tradition of Shabbat, where there's a pause on building a better world on the seventh day of the week, starting Friday at sundown and ending on Saturday at sunset. Text Shabbat is similar. In the rabbinic law, there is a restriction of travel and work to allow for time with family and worship. In the secular text Shabbat, the restriction of devices achieves a similar aim by making us put aside our screens and spend time relating to one another. No screens at the table. Make meals a screen-free zone so that it forces kids to interact. The Harvard-based Family Dinner Project has a great website and book with tips and tricks to make family mealtime special and fun, serving as a much-needed oasis from media culture. Have your kids turn in their device before going to bed, and as an added measure of caution, turn off the Wi-Fi to those devices after bedtime in case they manage to sneak it past you. This removes the reward for sneaking in extra time on the internet and when they should be sleeping and sets clear boundaries. Kids need those boundaries. And when it comes to social media, educate your teen of its harms. A study found that compared to teens that spent no time on social networking sites in a typical day, teens that did were 5 times likelier to have used tobacco, 3 times likelier to have used alcohol, twice as likely to have used marijuana. It makes sense. Social media is the echo chamber of media culture. The more your whole family can disconnect from it, the more independent in their thinking your kids can be, making them far more resilient to not only the manipulation in media, but also peer pressure to use substances. Another thing you can do is counteract the mainstream media and advertising messaging. For example, alcohol. Media always shows alcohol consumption as fun, elegant, and glamorous, and fails to show the reality. Adbusters created the spoof ad campaign for Absolute Vodka to show the other side to alcohol, the side that Absolute hopes you don't know about or will forget. The fact that alcohol, though often portrayed as a promise of sex for men, is more likely to lead to impotence, or that violence is often fueled by alcohol, or that alcohol for many lands them in Alcoholics Anonymous, or the worst outcome that someone ends up dead, either from a drunk driver or alcohol poisoning or any number of alcohol-related causes. Unfortunately, pornography is so mainstream now, so easy for kids to access, that it's impossible to talk about the media's impact on girls without talking about porn and how it is shaping young minds. Many adults assume that the porn kids run into today is similar to what we encountered as kids. It's not. The softcore porn of yesteryear is now what we're seeing in regular mainstream media. The pornography of today is what would have been considered hardcore in the 70s and 80s, but is now mainstream porn. And much of it is extreme body punishing sex. Many teens and preteens turn to it to learn how to do it, consequently learning the harmful behaviors that further the power imbalances between women and men. As the infographic above shows, it is a $97 billion industry. 88% of it contains physical aggression, 49% verbal aggression, and most targets were female. As philosopher Amia Srinivasan prepared to teach her college students about the porn debates of the 70s and 80s, she expected her students would find the second wave feminist anti-porn argument prudish and passé, but she could not have been more wrong. She writes, "Could it be that pornography doesn't merely depict the subordination of women, but actually makes it real?" I asked. "Yes," they said. "Does porn bear responsibility for the objectification of women, for the marginalization of women, for sexual violence against women?" "Yes," they said. "Yes to all of it." Pornography takes the sexism we see in mainstream media and takes it to a whole other level. The topic of pornography and its effect on young people's lives is so huge, it deserves a talk on its own. I recommend the documentary Over 18, which is 52 minutes and is available on YouTube. Pornography, like substance abuse, is being treated as an addiction now. The oppositional gaze is a term bell hooks coined to help Black women combat the dehumanizing representations of their kind, or even the lack of representation of Black women in culture at all. All women can benefit from this strategy. The dehumanizing portrayal of women often to sell as products, and the lack of true representation of women is harmful to us. By adopting an oppositional gaze, that means interrogating the messages we are fed about who we're supposed to be in the world. One way that women are not truly represented in is our stories. It is hard to see this, so let's do a test to help us see past this conditioning. First, think of a film that has at least two women. Scratch that. 2 named women. I'll wait. Some of you might be having trouble with this. That's okay. Just notice how long it takes for you to come up with one, or if you have, see if you can come up with another. And bring awareness to how difficult that is. Next question for this film. Do these women talk to each other? If not, think of a film that does. Again, notice how difficult this is. The last criteria is that they have to talk to each other about something other than a man or a boy. So let's review. Think of a film that has at least 2 named women that talk to each other about something other than a man or a boy. Think about that and what that means. The test does not ask much. It does not require the movie to be feminist or have meaningful dialogue, just to, even momentarily, show that women do not simply exist for men and men only. That they have their own thoughts, feelings, and desires, that have their own narrative arc that has nothing to do with a man and his journey. This test we just took was created in 1985 by artist Alison Bechdel in her comic, The Rule. The Bechdel-Walls test, as it is known, is used today to see if there's the barest of female representation, following those 3 basic criteria. It lays bare something that we have gotten used to, girls and women in film being secondary, being used as eye candy, positioned as being for the use of the male characters, and not being part of what drives the plot. But of course, this is not just in film. If you saw the first presentation in the series, you have seen how high culture, such as art and the classics, routinely shows women in this way. And Virginia Woolf wrote in A Room of One's Own about the dearth of stories showing women in relationship to each other, and not just as extensions of the men. It is said that the Bechdel-Walls test was inspired from this book. And don't forget fine art. Art often examines how power is expressed, giving disadvantaged people who culturally lack power access to it. Another way to foster the oppositional gaze is to immerse yourself in and expose your children to content from a completely different perspective that challenges the existing paradigm. Adbusters, the Journal of the Mental Environment, is a counterculture magazine critical of advertising. In order to do this, there were no paid ads in their magazine, and they received no funding or sponsorships from corporations or from the government. They see their work as a protest against how much advertising shapes culture and our inner worlds. I like how Adbusters calls themselves the Journal of the Mental Environment, because the aim of advertising is to make you feel you need whatever it is they're selling. As world-renowned graffiti artist Banksy and culture critic Sean Tayarachi put it, they butt into your life, take a cheap shot at you, and then disappear. They leer at you from tall buildings and make you feel small. They make flippant comments from buses that imply you're not sexy enough and that all the fun is happening somewhere else. They are on your TV making your girlfriend feel inadequate. Fuck that. Any advert in a public space that gives you no choice whether you see it or not is yours. It's yours to take, rearrange, and reuse. You can do whatever you like with it. Asking for permission is like asking to keep a rock someone just threw at your head. But most of all, help your children talk back to these destructive messages. The tapping into their yearning for power and recognition only to be used against them to sell products and harm their health and well-being. And maybe someday enough of our culture shifts where we take seriously how media pollutes the mental and emotional environment, and we all become Wonder Woman, deflecting the sexism, manipulation, hypersexualization, and the other harms hurled our way. Thank you.